to come here, to celebrate, to have breakfast, and to really enjoy the speaking today from our panelists here. I'll jump right in and do some of the introductions. So first, on the very left, we have Mary Van Buren. Mary is the president of CCA, the Canadian Construction Association. The Canadian Construction Association is the only national association representing contractors, both general, trade, and civil, and manufacturers, service providers, and suppliers in Canada. Following Mary, we have Alex Carrick. Alex is a chief economist at Construct Connect and has spent over 37 years presenting North America on the US, Canadian, and World Construction Forums. And then finally, we have Adam Friel, the editor of On-Site magazine, owned by Annex Media, who also distributes other industry trade magazines you may be reading, like HPAC Magazine, Electrical Business, Canadian Contractor, and Glass Canada. And finally, and last but not least, we have Harshil Gupta. Harshil is our product marketing for Canada and is our host this morning. So again, thank you all so much for coming here today. I'll pass it on to Harshil to kick it off, the panel discussion.
Thanks, Christina. Now, before we start our conversations with the panel, I'd like to paint a quick picture of the kind of environment we find ourselves operating in. And we do this by having a look at how we finished 2022. So in 2022, 127 billion worth of building permits were issued till the end of November, which represents an 8.4% increase when compared with the same period in 2021. Now, does this mean that we technically have more construction projects going out off ground? So one way to answer that question is to look at the total number of building permits that were issued. So in that regard, over 406K building permits were issued till November 2022, which actually represents a 11% decrease in the number of total permits. So as you can see, while the value of permits has been rising, the number of permits has been decreasing. Another thing that has been trending up though is the cost of construction. So both the residential and non-residential price indexes have been trending upwards on a year-on-year and a quarter-on-quarter basis. And this is driven by a whole range of factors, from supply chain disruptions to increase in the cost of borrowing to a very tight labor market. And speaking of the labor market, there were around 88K job vacancies in construction in Q3 2022. And on top of that, BuildForce estimates that around 155K construction workers will actually retire over the next 5 years. And when these people do retire, they'll take with them a generation's worth of valuable knowledge and experience. Now let's just spend a minute on how the Canadian economy is expected to perform this year. So BDC expects the Canadian economy to grow by a modest 0.5% in 2023. In their words, they would like us to think of this as economic stagnation rather than a recession. So basically, they expect a couple of quarters of negative GDP growth. And with that, I think it's time to open up this conversation with our panelists. So knowing what we know about the overall economy in 2023 and the key trends we saw in 2022, how do we expect construction to fare? Now, one thing I think we can all agree on is that not all segments within construction might trend in the same way. So what are some opportunities and challenges we see for individual construction segments like residential, commercial, industrial, and infrastructure? And Mary, I would like you to get us started here.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today. We at the CCA have also started issuing an economic outlook report, and it's mainly confined to the ICIC market, so not so much about residential. However, in our report, when we looked at it, we did see that combined, the two sectors represented about 7.5% of GDP in Q1, Q2. And we did see some slowdown in Q2, and that was mainly due to the residential side. So, we have seen some slowdown. That said, the sentiment and optimism in the sector remains high. And there are a few reasons for that. Number one, the federal government Invest in Canada plan has set aside $180 billion to invest in Canada's infrastructure. And of that, something like 70% of it has been committed, and about, I think, 40% or so has been spent. So there's a lot of pipeline there, a lot of projects still to be built. So I think that's really positive news. The second factor is, of course, greening our buildings and our civil infrastructure as well. I think we've all experienced some of the climate unpredictability. So, BC a couple years ago with Hurricane Fiona in Atlantic Canada, and even Ottawa, we had a derecho, a new word for me. I'd never heard of that before. And, something like $800 million in damage from that one storm alone. So there is a lot of need to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient. Another important factor is immigration. So we're looking at about 500,000 immigrants every year into Canada, which is very welcome news. That said, affordable housing remains a deep concern, particularly in your market here, Vancouver and other markets. And when we build housing, it's not just the houses, obviously. It's the roads, it's the sewers, it's the hospitals, it's the fire stations. So as we're building more housing, we're also building out the communities. And the last point I wanted to make is around Canada's infrastructure. So most of it was built in the 50s, and it's decaying. Our roads and bridges are in not great condition, and we were joking this morning about some of the potholes on the DVP and Gartner and other important routes. So, and that's no different across Canada. Alberta has its own Fix Our Roads campaign. Manitoba has something similar. So. While there has been some softening due to some of the economic issues like inflation, like workforce shortage, like supply chain, overall, we're very confident that the sector will remain strong.
And Adam, just moving on to you, how do you expect the sector to react, especially on the residential side of things, especially when you consider the rising interest rates, affordability issues, and overall just housing shortages?
Sure, and I guess with OnSite, we cover a lot of the ICI and infrastructure market as well, and we're very aware of the fact that the sub-segments within the sectors, they're not all going to be rowing in the same direction this year, and that's one of those things that it's interesting to observe from our perspective. And the navigation, of course, is going to fall on the other side of the microphone in this room. But some of the things that we're observing out there, of course, is that on the non-residential side, there is that backlog. And one of the things years ago that a commercial contractor mentioned to me is that on the commercial side, with that backlog, there's a bit of a cushioning effect. So when things happen in the marketplace, there is a level of activity that's always there, and you're not having to react as quickly as some other segments of the market. And speaking of one of them, like I know in my regard, I've been following the construction numbers for more than 20 years now, and on the residential side, I think current market conditions, like the low-rise single-family residential, is the sector that's probably most challenged at the moment. We are seeing not as much movement, I guess, on the numbers for like the high-rise multifamily residential, that side of things. And I think the policies like the increase of the immigration policy is bringing more people into the country. And as households get formed, one of the numbers that I love looking for is household formation. It's a net number. It's one of those that can be, you have to take it in addition to a number of other factors. But that net number, I think last year came in around about just shy of 170,000. That's 170,000 families that need somewhere to live. And multifamily makes a lot of sense in that regard. As more immigration comes in, we're going to have need for housing. So we do have that, that need that's going to, I think in the coming year, provide a bit of stability. You know, right now, there's always the concern about mortgage rates. We just had the overnight hike again that hit. Those are factors that come into play, of course. But I think we're going to see that kind of settle down a little bit. Anytime there's a massive change, it takes a little bit for everybody to adjust. But I think that on the residential side, I'm not seeing a big decline. I think last year it was a little over 240,000 starts. You know, if you ask me with a crystal ball where it would be, I think you're going to see very similar.
Sounds fair. And Alec, from your perspective, how do you expect construction to fare this year? Any major trends that you see coming over from the US, especially to Canada?
Well, thank you, Hasha. This is a great room, eh? I was thinking, I think all the top performers have been here at some time or another. And I don't know whether I should be breaking into song here, because I think Frank Sinatra's performed here and other ones. My perspective on the outlook is perhaps different because I look at both the United States and Canada. So I'll be talking about both countries. And I'm way more optimistic. I think all the talk about recession and so on is really overblown. The U.S. economy in the third quarter and fourth quarter of last year had very strong GDP growth. The first two quarters were weak. As a whole for 2022, they had an increase of 2.1% of GDP, which is exactly the same as the average over the past 20 years. So it's a pretty decent year. And the number that I really look at is initial jobless claims. And when that figure's below 300,000, that generally means the economy's strong. And it's been below 200,000 for quite some time. Sometimes it goes back up over 200,000, but lately it's been back under 200,000. And the interest rates really haven't impacted that. And unemployment rates are very low in both countries. Now, there's going to be some short-term stress because of the higher interest rates and because we're talking ourselves down, like everybody's been saying that there's going to be a recession. And that is appearing, particularly in the US market in terms of housing, but it's not really affecting the Canadian starts numbers so much. They've come down a tiny bit. And it'll affect, the higher interest rates will affect some non-residential building categories like commercial and office buildings and so on. But office buildings weren't going anywhere anyway because people have been working from home. And there's that whole thing to get through, that whole trend towards do you come back to work or you don't come back to work. And that's a whole issue about your labor force because older workers don't really want to go back to the commute and so on. But so short term, some pain. Longer term though, I think there's something that's happening that is really crucial for everybody to understand. And we're in it. And I think a lot of people thought that this wasn't going to happen for some time. I mean, you talked about it, but it's here. And that is, there's a universal trend around the world towards net zero emissions by 2050. And this is as big, if you think about this, it's as big as the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s or the high-tech boom in the late 1900s, because the whole world has been dependent on fossil fuels up to this stage of its development. And from now on, the whole world is working towards getting off fossil fuels and moving to other sources like electricity and hydrogen and so on. And, you know, there are climate change deniers out there, and it doesn't really even matter anymore whether you believe that there's climate change and that we should be making these changes. It's happening. And the reason that I say this is that last year, I've never seen anything like the number of mega projects, mega construction projects that started in the United States. And all these measures by Washington, like if I go to the States and I talk down there, I've got to be very careful about talking politics because, you know, there's such a big divide between the Republicans and the Democrats. But I'm here in Toronto. Any Americans in the audience?
I think we are safe.
So, I can, the Democrats have brought in these policies, the IIRA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, and the CHIPS Act, and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Inflation Reduction Act in particular is basically a climate change act, which includes all kinds of incentives to go ahead with major spending to get away from fossil fuels and towards wind and solar power and hydrogen plants and recharging stations across the nation and so on. So I was talking about mega projects. Well, last year in the United States, there was a record number of mega project starts. And those projects were car plants, electric vehicle car plants, and battery plants, and hydrogen plants, and carbon capture and storage plants, and LNG facilities, which is tied to the geopolitics of what's happening in Europe, because there's now this huge energy price differential between North America and other parts of the world. And as part of this new world order, Washington has taken a much more strategic position. And by that I mean that they realize that there has to be tremendous more investment in manufacturing in the United States. Like you've been hearing about how they've been trying to bring manufacturing jobs back from Asia. And again, whether you think that this is likely to happen longer term or not, makes no difference because it's happening. And these big projects don't depend on interest rates. They are governed by long-term plans, cash flow, raising money from other sources, and so on. And when I say that they're thinking strategically, what they're doing in that area is really having this big boom in computer chip making plants. Like the number of chip making plants in the US is just unbelievable. And a lot of them are being built in Arizona and Texas, Ohio. Intel's got a project in Ohio, chip making plants. So it's the mega projects. And it used to be Canada that had the mega projects because here we used to have the oil sands and we used to have natural resource projects. But it's now the United States where that action is occurring. And that takes some understanding of where we are in this new world order. Now there's some mega projects coming to Canada. There's that Stellantis LG battery plant in Windsor that's starting. There's some mega projects in the resource area. You see, if you go towards electricity, and most people figure that if you get off fossil fuels, the biggest answer is going to be electricity. Well, if you move towards electricity, you're going to need things like more copper and nickel and alloys that go into steel making and the making of other products to make them lighter and stronger and so on, so they don't use as much energy. So Canada has tremendous opportunities in terms of commodities. And I'm sorry, I'm just going on here. But the thing with commodities that you have to understand is that commodities are a two-edged sword. And I'm getting old. I feel like it's my job to try and pass on as much of this nonsense as I can. So that's why I'm telling you. Commodities are a two-edged sword. Everybody's worried about the price of commodities because of what that does in terms of inflation. But if you've got an increase in commodity price, that's an incentive for people who own those commodities or those extraction sites to invest money. So that's one of the advantages that Canada has. Another big advantage that Canada has is that a lot of our power is hydroelectric. So we don't have to worry as much about carbon-friendly power generation here. And the third big advantage that we have is incredible population growth, because so many other countries around the world, their populations are declining or they're flat. Canada's population growth is phenomenal. We'll get into that maybe later. But the latest annual figure for the population increase in Canada from Statistics Canada is plus 900,000 people. Canada has 6 cities that have 1 million people in them. If you're adding 900,000 people every year, think about that. That's another city, almost another city, of 1 million people every year. And what does that mean in terms of construction? So temporary problems, maybe in terms of slowdown in construction activity. Longer term, I don't see how there can't be another, because this is happening worldwide. This thing, net zero carbon emissions, is worldwide. I don't see how there can't be another commodity super cycle, and these shifts, I can't see how this can't be really, really positive for the construction sector.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the insights there. And one of the things you touched upon there were broader geopolitical trends. I would just like to talk to you all a bit more about that. So we have China opening up now and giving up on its zero COVID policy, which basically means that factories are opening up and ramping up. And then we have an ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So what are the kind of impact these big challenges will have on the industry, for example, on supply chain and material pricing? And Mary, would love for you to sort of add in something there.
Yeah, it's always Canada's dilemma. We are a trading nation, as you know. 2/3 of our GDP comes from being an exporter. And our number one trading partner to this day is the US. So as Canadians, we're always trying to balance how do we keep that number one customer happy. And Alec was talking about the significant investments they've been making, something like $1.2 trillion in infrastructure. So they're eating up a lot of resources. They're also putting pressure on the workforce because they need people as well. So while Canada continues to have that strong relationship with the US, and certainly in the short term, we've all seen the charts that show that Asia at some point will equal or be greater than the US as an exporter, so as a customer. So what does that mean for us? Well, one of the things it means is that we have to have trade enabling infrastructure. And that we've fallen quite far behind. And we commissioned a report with the Canada West Foundation along with some other leading business associations to ask the federal government to start reinvesting in Canada's infrastructure. We need at least $20 billion, and that's things like ports. 60% of Canada's goods are shipped through Western Canada. 50% of the goods go through the Port of Vancouver alone. And I don't know if you've been out to Vancouver recently. If you're there, you see in the ocean, 7 to 10 container ships every day just waiting to offload. Prince Rupert, same problem. So it's it's a really missed opportunity for Canada. We've also fallen to something like number 32 in terms of the reliability and reputation of our infrastructure. So as Canadians, we can't allow that. That is going to affect our economic and social well-being. So these are significant opportunities for Canadians, for Canada, that we need to look after. So that's a really important part. In terms of supply chain, it has settled down for the most part. Energy has somewhat settled down, but there's certainly a lot more attention on it. We all know through COVID, you know, with getting vaccines when you're dependent on other countries, and same with a lot of our supplies. It's not an easy question to get your head around, and certainly they're experts in the Canadian manufacturing sector. There's a high cost to insource. You know, we can reduce some things, like it's lower time to market, but the labor costs can be a lot higher. So we have to figure out what's that right balance of ensuring we have, you know, security over our own supplies, what that cost, and how we can get more efficiency. And certainly one of the things being considered is whether it's increasing Canada's domestic ability or it's working more closely with the United States so that we have more of a shared material and inventory supply management, so we have a better handle on that. So lots of things happening geopolitically, but certainly near term, U.S. is still, you know, Canada's most important trade partner, but we can't ignore the long term, and we've got to really ramp up our trade enabling infrastructure.
Thank you for that. Now, one thing both of you talked about was labor. And I see that being a red thread for us across the past few years. We have had labor shortages. So how do we see the industry faring when it comes to labor in 2023? And I'd like to start with you, Adam. You have often said that tech has some role to play when it comes to these shortages.
Yeah, I think it's labor is one of these things. When I first started reporting this sector, again, 25 years ago, labor was always in the top three of issues, and it's not gone away. We haven't, it was much easier 20 years ago to ignore it and poach a few people from another job site if you needed. That's starting to become something that the numbers just aren't there, the bodies aren't there, the skilled trades aren't there. And so to solve that, I think we're looking at a very, it's not a very simple problem. If it was simple, it would have been solved years ago. But it is coming to a head, and I think all of us on the panel here are going to address a few key points to it. But I think technology definitely plays a role in it. I've looked at a lot of products over the past 20 years, and evolution of products and techniques of installation and whatnot. And you know, I think of things like, I spent a lot of time covering the plumbing sector, press fittings versus soldered fittings. You know, pressing takes much less time. A crew can get in and out much quicker. So it's one of those facets that will play a role where if you don't have as many bodies as what you used to, how do you get more productive or more efficient with the bodies that you do have? So there's definitely that aspect to it. There's also things like, I know, we're on a Procore sponsored panel here, but software plays a big role. Being able to manage projects, minimize paperwork, the rekeying of reports and that. You know, and when I talk to contractors who have been in the trades forever, and they say, you know, I used to have to handwrite out certain reports and hope that they made it to the office, hope they got keyed in again. All of those things. It's about doing more with what we do have, and technology is massive for that.
So one thing I get from that is that productivity is something that we need to look at as an industry. Anything you want to add there, Alec, around labor shortages and productivity?
Well, the labor question, it's been around for a long time. And I remember back in the zeros, everybody was concerned about the oil sands projects, that they couldn't get built because there weren't enough people to build them. Well, they got built. So every time I'm somewhere and at a construction conference, labor always comes up as being the number one priority. There's a shortage of labor. Well, somehow or other, the projects get built. it's not very often that you hear that such and such a project wasn't built because there was a labor shortage. Now, for Canada, when I talked about the big population increase, 80% to 90% of the population gain now is from immigration. So it's a matter of trying to find workers who will contribute to the economy, either in terms of capital that they bring with them or the skills that they bring with them, not the high-tech skills that they bring with them. But the thing to understand, too, is it's not just construction that has a shortage of labor. It's across all kinds of different categories of work and all kinds of different industries. Plus the fact that with the change that's going on towards net zero emissions and so on, there's going to be all these new kinds of jobs which are going to divert workers. Like you can get into selling things on the metaverse, or you can design virtual reality headsets. So you get involved in that. And you'd say, well, really? Well, yeah, I have a son, and that's what he does. He writes music for virtual headsets. Because when you turn your head, the music, it's not like a normal stereo. When you turn your head, the music's got to go up and down with you and so on. And the other really interesting thing that's happening with labor is that they have reacquired leverage. Because in the 0-0s, if you didn't like your job, you didn't complain because you knew that your job would be outsourced to China or Vietnam or some other place around the world where labor rates were so much lower. So labor has reacquired leverage in contract negotiations. And wages are increasing about 6% in both Canada and the United States, which isn't that far off where inflation is now. So if you're in management and you know that labor has got more leverage, and you're hearing about labor unrest, and there are instances of strikes now where there weren't for the longest time. There are instances of workers going off the job. And if you're in management and you know that labor has reacquired this power in negotiations, what can you do? Well, the answer is obviously automation. Like we had this real push towards robotics and so on. So that trend is only going to accelerate. So that's, my wife and I and the kids, we'll go out for dinner on the weekend. And I'll give a plug to this one restaurant, Egg Smart. We go for breakfast at Egg Smart. And we order breakfast, and it just knocked me out the first time. Our order was brought by a robot. I just love it. The only problem is you got to leave 2 tips.
Now, one of the things that Alec talked about was the need to attract this. So we have a lot of newcomers coming into Canada, and basically we need to attract new talent to the industry overall. And Mary, this is something I wanted to talk to you about, that how are you going to do that as an industry?
You know, I'd kind of like to pick up first on some of the comments made, and our contractors certainly are feeling the pain of the workforce shortage. They've had to turn down jobs that they might have otherwise done. They haven't been able to complete their projects on time because the workforce is otherwise involved. And that has very real impact on the contracts, as those of you know. There can be penalty clauses. You're not getting the work done on time. There are other delays. So the contracting nature of it makes managing that workforce certainly more challenging, and it can be financially punitive. And in COVID in particular, it was really tough times trying to balance what what your contract said and what the reality of this market was that came out of nowhere. So the labor issues are certainly very real, and it's also impacting Canada's ability to grow. If we're not building those projects that are needed, whether that's the school or fixing the roads, then it does impact our quality of life. So there's a lot of work that has been done by the industry, and congrats to the industry, the firms, and also the associations who have worked really hard to showcase the industry as inclusive, diverse, attracting new segments, working really hard to get women in, to get Indigenous people, to get new Canadians in. And that work will continue. But we are still in a shortage, and so we are turning our eyes to immigration, and we've been very vocal with the federal government at our Hill Day most recently, and so we were pleased when Minister Fraser announced the increased immigration. But it's not just about throwing more bodies. Alec, as you were saying, the work is more skilled, and it's getting more skilled, and it's changing. So we need to change the point system for immigration. We need to recognize the value of the skilled trades. Right now, some of the pointing system is that the higher education you have, the more likely you are to get in. And nothing against PhDs. I have an MBA, so I completely support higher education. But that's not the only people we need. We need people who are willing to work in our industry. And for the civil sector in particular, a lot of their occupations are not considered skilled, even though they are skilled. So they're at even more of a disadvantage. So immigration is certainly part of the solution, but we need to change the pointing system to get those folks in. And just picking up on the technology theme, lots certainly to help in automation, but even things like exoskeletons that can help people in the work itself. I'm not a very big person, and if I were working in that sort of work, then I would certainly want some helping devices, and we're seeing a lot more of that happening. People who are working on floors, there's some things that they have to help scoot around that really reduces the wear and tear on their knees. So that's really helping the industry also attract a different type of people. I guess last but not least, the pitch for our industry is positioning construction as a career of choice and not last resort. Many of our school systems, our universities, they position university as the only or as the best career choice, the only way to have success. And well, obviously we all know that's not true. And there are many advantages to going into the trades, running your own business, and people who like to work with their hands and make contributions in different ways. So that's a challenge for all of us to make sure that our kids are inspired to do the work that they want to do, and that in the construction industry they can have that meaningful connection. Contractors, they love to point to things that they worked on or their parent worked on. So that's a challenge for all of us to make sure that construction is top of mind. And we are in a war for talent. So healthcare is out there, and it's very emotional, right? When you see the nurses and doctors helping your baby on TV. But we also need the people in our industry to build those hospitals and help those people get to work. So that's a big challenge that we're continuing to work on, and we have a campaign called Talent Fits Here to position the industry as a career of choice. And again, many of our associations across Canada are also doing great work, as well as our companies.
Yeah, if you don't mind my 2 cents on that, it's funny, I play hockey with a whole bunch of high school teachers, including an instructor who came from the trades and went and he's now helping with like the OYAP program, the Ontario Youth Apprentice Program, and things of that nature. And I think one of the things that's been a theme all along in trying to attract and make the trades an attractive place to earn a career, it still comes down to turning the minds of the parents of those kids. It's funny, years and years ago, 25 years ago, I asked the same question, got the same answer. It's parents are saying that I need to go to university or go to college rather than to an apprenticeship program. So that's one of those things that anything anybody in this room can do to help change the hearts and minds there, it really does happen around the kitchen table when somebody expresses an interest, that they're going to be supported and not redirected into what's perceived as a higher level. And ultimately, the trades are a fantastic place to earn a career. There's great opportunities there. And then at the high school level, one of the discussions we were having the other night after our game, it was a discussion of does anybody have any room to take co-ops? Because the schools are constantly looking for places to send kids to get experience. I know there is a challenge with the younger students because some job sites you can't be on until you're 16 or 17. So what do you do with somebody who's 14 and wants to get involved? There's a lag and delay, and I don't know the answer to that one, but if there are any programs that can help explore the trades for younger and younger, I always figure it's McDonald's did a great thing with the Happy Meal to Big Mac plan. You know, you start somebody off with a taste of it, and you've got them for life. And I hate to say I still eat Big Macs, but I do. You know.
So we basically, as an industry, need to find ways to reach these children earlier on in their education journey.
Absolutely, and focus on the family, so the family supports that decision as well. Because you know, not all of us grew up in a trades family where we would have a direct linkage there. But I know when I went through school, it wasn't even on the radar. It was, you know.
Fair enough.
Actually, if I might just, and you did an excellent job of talking on construction about the impact
Thank you.
for labor, and I didn't mean to belittle the how much of a problem it's been for construction, but it's a difficult question. And if you think about the people who work in construction, I mean, the answers for the shortage are trying to retain older workers, bringing more women in, bringing in indigenous people into the profession and so on. But you also got to teach people, or you got to, and then it's also a matter of with younger people, you try to show them that if you work in construction, it's like working on a computer game. If you're working heavy equipment, for example, it's the same as operating equipment off your computer, which would make it more fun. So there's these other ways of looking at it. But anyway, it's a problem, and I'm not entirely sure how it's going to be resolved. Well, the sources of construction employment really are, or the two pools of construction workers are manufacturing and construction, because a lot of people who work in manufacturing could work in construction. So you got the two going back and forth. And it's really fascinating that in Canada, there used to be a lot more manufacturing jobs than construction jobs. But now there's almost convergence. Like the number of construction jobs to manufacturing jobs is 90%. That hasn't happened in the United States just yet. But it's happening, but it has happened in Canada. So manufacturing's really one of the key pools. And that convergence has happened. But what you got to wonder is the convergence going to start to spread apart again with the notion of modular. And modular is a concept that's been around forever, and it has taken off. It just hasn't taken off in the flashy fashion that people expect. Like you think that you'd be going somewhere and you'd just be seeing building blocks going up. Now that has happened in some countries, but not so much in North America. And perhaps it should. And then they're doing 3D printing of projects, 3D printing of houses through cement and so on. I noticed the other day that somebody's doing a 3D print of a house using wood fiber. Now I gotta say, a 3D printed house with wood fiber has more appeal to me than a 3D house printed with cement or concrete. Anybody here from the concrete industry? Good. I'm batting 100 here. And modular is happening, but it's in components. It's companies that are providing HVAC systems and electrical systems and so on. So it's not the flashy way that one might expect it to happen. And modular is manufacturing. And that's a way to get more people involved in construction, is to have them so they don't have to go to job sites, which are sometimes cold, sometimes hot, and so on. But you can go and work in a plant and make components that go into construction. So that's just another thing to think about is modular.
That's really interesting, and I see you mentioning timber there, and that's sort of a neat segue into the next question I wanted to talk about. So I feel the way we are building and need to build is continuously changing, and there are key two trends here. The first trend I want to touch upon today is green buildings and sustainable construction. And Adam, we'll start with you on this one. So what are some of the trends you're currently seeing in the market when it comes to sustainability and green buildings?
I think the biggest thing here for me has always been conservation, and the tightening of buildings has been an ongoing thing for quite some time now, but we are seeing more and more of it, passive house theory and things like that working their way into a broader based building. And I love the phrase, what is it, build it tight, ventilate right, from perspective of ensuring that the envelope of the building is secure, so you're not losing BTUs one way or the other, depending upon the season, which causes energy to be used to recondition that space. So there's, I think it really, for me, comes down to conservation. If you can get away with using the same amount of energy to heat, say, 3 buildings instead of 1, that's massive. That's like finding 2 new power plants somewhere. So these are things that the construction sector can have influence in, just in the way that the buildings are being put together, how code standards and whatnot are coming together, and there is a definite push towards reducing that leakage, and it's getting tighter and tighter every year, which I think is a very good positive.
Absolutely. And Alec, you mentioned something about modular buildings and use of timber, and potentially that leading to reduced wastage because you're prefabricating a lot of things. Anything you would like to highlight there?
Well, there's tremendous things that are happening in terms of how construction is taking place, and really, you do what the kids do, and they go on YouTube. Like, YouTube is more popular than television for the kids. And you go on there and you can see just about any kind of thing that you want in terms of construction technology and so on. I mean, YouTube alone makes a big difference. We came home from being away one weekend, and our eldest daughter had replaced the sink in her bathroom. And she did it because she went on YouTube and got instructions. I went in there and saw a caulking gun and said, what's going on here? She took it upon herself just to get on YouTube and found a way to replace the sink. It's just amazing. So it's about keeping up with the new technologies. And this applies in so many areas. Like there's parts of the world, Sweden, there's the Swedish Academy of Engineering or something, I'm not sure what it is, but it's come up with a way to make glass or see-through, I guess it's not called glass, wood. They remove components of wood and they fill it with lactose from fruit, and you can see through it. And there's all kinds of changes like this. So it's a matter of trying to keep up with the technology. Now in Sweden, they've built the first steel mill that doesn't use coking coal. It uses hydrogen. So the companies that are really big in carbon emissions in steel and cement and aluminum and so on, they're all changing the way they do their processes. So it's important to keep up on that. And in terms of whether the industry is going to keep going in this direction, well, yeah, of course it is. There isn't a company out there that's involved in construction that doesn't know it has to be a lot more transparent about the products that are going into, about the materials that are going into the products that they provide. And so, yeah, this is a trend, and we're going down this path, and there's no turning back from this.
And Mary, from a CCA perspective, do you expect to see more legislation around green buildings and sustainability?
So the federal government, as everyone knows, has already made a commitment to net zero. And over the last probably 6 months or so, we've seen significant momentum in the federal government figuring out what this means for construction. And I say figuring out because really we're all in it together, and that's the message we've been bringing. The industry needs to be at the table. There are things like, when they say, well, we want your building, we want it to be green. Well, whose definition is green? And contractors want assurance that if they choose a product, if that's within their domain to do that is going to be considered a green product. So a lot of work is being done to make those definitions. The building code is changing. And again, the industry is going to be at that table to make sure that whatever those implications are, it makes sense for the industry and the industry can be prepared. The Cement and Concrete Association has made their commitment that by 2050, their products will be net carbon zero. So a lot of progress is being made. I agree, it's a very exciting time, lots of opportunity for Canada to take the lead. But it's important that all of us are at the table and that these decisions aren't made independently of the industry, the people who will be providing the service, which includes manufacturers. It takes something like 5 years to build a new cement factory, so this can't happen overnight. And if the procurement doesn't keep pace with the industry and vice versa, then we're going to be in this seesaw position again where there's a mismatch of projects and Canadian capacity. So education is a big part of it as well. We're looking at partnering with the Green Building Association to make sure that we can provide some of that education. Big contractors, have more resources to do that, but most of our industry, about 75%, are small and medium-sized enterprises. So they're going to need some more help in understanding what is green procurement, what's their role in it, and how can they ensure that their workforce also has the skills to keep pace and to contribute.
Excellent. And another change we are starting to see in the way we build is this gradual evolution from a linear design and build to sort of a more hand-in-hand design and build. So what's leading this change? And Adam, will probably start with you. So do you see an evolution in terms of the project management delivery methods that we utilize currently?
I've seen a lot of discussion on it for sure. There are new delivery models that are very collaborative, and even the ones that were not as collaborative previously, some of the learnings, I guess, or some of the influence from those other delivery models are making their way in. And how I always view it is like communication's key. When you're not communicating, if you can communicate early, you avoid penalties and problems late. And it's those penalties and problems that have always been a sticking point. So I think it just makes sense that we're kind of evolving to a more collaborative way of going about the projects, because there are so many different players at the table trying to you take a hospital, for example, the number of trades involved, the number of companies involved. So it just makes sense that communication, the more streamlined you can have that between the parties, the less likely you're going to have misunderstandings and kind of the fallout after the fact.
So maybe we are starting to see contractors, like Adam just mentioned, being brought in much earlier on projects now. Do you see this trend continuing?
Yeah, CCA has been advancing collaborative projects for over 25 years. And I would like to say that we've made significant progress as an industry, but there's still probably more room to grow. And part of the challenge, particularly for public governments and agencies, is that they have a hard time explaining to the public anything other than low cost. And if they say, we chose the lowest cost, then everyone feels like, okay, that's a win. It's not necessarily a win, as you know. Best value, or the right value, is equally important. So it's a really tough mindset for the governments to move away from low cost. Tremendous benefits in using alternative project delivery models. There are many, IPD, construction management, et cetera. But you have to also have the right model with the right project. And sometimes things will happen where a government will bundle, let's say, 6 schools together, but it doesn't make sense because the 6 schools are in 6 different geographies with 6 different designs, and you're not really getting an economy of scale in production. You just happen to have one contractor, perhaps. So there's a lot more education that needs to be done, and really the goal is to have fair procurement, to reduce the risk for the contractors who often have to take very onerous clauses on to win the project, and to have a better outcome for the project overall. So lots more work to be done. We're certainly seeing more interest in it. Agencies like Defence Construction Canada, they have been quite progressive. They're also talking about expanding the use of BIM in their own projects, so that will also help and bring more of that collaboration forward and hopefully more innovation.
Absolutely. And so I'll just like to close up this whole conversation with a very rapid fire question here. What's one thing that you are looking forward to most in 2023? And Alec, you could go first.
Well, there are a couple of things I feel I have to mention. For one thing here, is where you are right now. I don't know that most people realize just what a behemoth Toronto has become. Like, Toronto is the 4th largest urban center in North America now, according to some measures. New York, Los Angeles, and Mexico City in first place. But let me just give you an example of this. Toronto, if you go to Statistics Canada and you look at their population numbers for census metropolitan areas, which are broader definitions of cities, the population of Toronto is now 93% of the population of Montreal plus Vancouver. So Toronto is almost as big in terms of population as the 2 next biggest cities in the country. And that's pretty amazing. Canada's going to hit a population of 40 million a year from now. And I remember thinking a number of years ago, you know, within 10 years, Canada will be at 10 million. It's happened way quicker than anybody thought it was going to happen. If you're looking at the United States, you wouldn't believe how dominant Texas is in the START statistics. Like, Texas, as #1 state in the United States, had double the volume of non-residential construction starts as second place California. And Texas has, they've got lower taxes and so on. In terms of what I would watch for in 2023, getting back to your question, I would think one of the key determinants is going to be U.S. politics, is to see what happens south of the border and get a deeper understanding and deeper reading of what is happening down in the United States. China is not the factor that it used to be. China's got all kinds of problems. China had a population flattening or decrease last year for the first time. There's 40 million more males in China than females. They've got a lot of social issues, and there's things happening in terms of their real estate sector is a mess. So anyway, because we were supposed to talk a little bit about geopolitics, so I throw that in at the end.
Fair point. And Mary, how about you? What are you looking forward to the most in 2023?
The industry has really shown its resilience, through COVID. We kept on working, we delivered our projects, we kept our people safe. And it was quite the roller coaster for all of us. And I'm looking to some more predictability, that inflation will stabilize, the supply chain is stabilizing. The workforce may not be completely stabilized, but a little more predictability around are they working in the office, working from home, hybrid? And so I think that is always good for business when there's just more predictability in the marketplace. And a wish would be that the federal government does commit to a long-term infrastructure plan, 25 years. And again, that would lead more predictability and would help all businesses better plan for their workforce, for their technology, for their businesses.
Excellent. And Adam, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely echo the stability factor for sure. Along with that, anything that helps on the price of building materials. I've got some work around the house that I need to get done, so that wouldn't be a bad thing. But I think ultimately for me, I love seeing the big projects. We've got a lot of infrastructure projects that are ongoing and will be ongoing for quite some time. And that's great stability for somebody like me that needs things to write about. So I'm looking forward to further advancements on some of the highways and whatnot that are in the works. The Ontario line, I think, was long overdue, but I know there's some controversy depending on where you sit on that fence. But I do like the concept of connecting a little bit more of the city through public transit like that. So those sorts of projects I love seeing come forward. And as much as there's that worry about a contraction a little bit in the number of projects that might get approved over the short term, I think long term we've got a good outlook. We've got population growth. We need these things that are being built. As Mary said, with housing comes needs of other needs as well. Population increase means typically more schools, more hospitals, all of that. It's all connected. So looking forward to watching hopefully another year of growth. And if not, I don't think it's going to be a big dip, but I'm hoping for that growth, yeah.
I'm into that. And I think with that, we can open up for a few questions. I know we're just out of time, but if you have any questions for the panel. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Terry Fitzsimmons, I work in the ICI sector as a consultant here in mostly Ontario. And I'm very kerfuffled about this labor thing. Adam's been covering it for 20 years. We don't seem to have it fixed. I don't understand what's going on, and I'll ask my question in a minute. We put out an ad. We get 200 applicants for one position. They're not all qualified, but we get 200. I mentor a lot of young kids. They don't have work. They can't find jobs. They can't seem to understand how to work outside of Indeed, i.e. network, to get a job. So my question to the panel is, the other thing I want to say is all these contractors, I'm sitting here, one there, they're all capitalists, okay? And capitalists have to make money. Generally, if they're public, they got to make it quarter by quarter. Maybe they have a year, but they don't have 20 years to make money. So my question to the panel is, how can the government, whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal, help these contractors to bring on these 900,000 people, get them into our trade, trade them, and make it economically viable for them or us to bring more of these people, more inclusive? Because it's a long-term capital endeavor. It's not a short-term capital. You won't make money bringing a kid on in the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. They're just cost. Thank you.
Anyone want to pitch in?
I'll take a stab at part of it. We get, collectively, a lot of interest in apprenticeship programs, and that doesn't seem to be the problem, actually attracting them into the trades. The problem seems to be retaining them in the trades. And perhaps one area would be, how do we keep them running through the program so that there isn't as much investment, up front. You're having a whole bunch of people you're trying to weed through who finally finish. So I think there's some things around the apprentice system that we could certainly look at, would be a good start. And as far as, again, the mismatch of number of people applying to the jobs, again, I don't think our industry is that well understood. We've had conversations at time with the government, federal government, where we were seeking out some dollars for innovation investment. And kind of the attitude was, well, you're old school. Why would we invest in your industry? And it's like, you know, they sometimes see the workers as substitutes. So I think there's a bit of that in Canadian society. They see construction as, you know, the flag person maybe on the street, like just the absolute person you see. They don't see the complexity of the industry. They don't see it's the, you know, the project managers, the engineers, the estimators, you know, the crane operators. They don't see it all. They only see a very small part of it, and that's up to us as an industry to show how exciting and the skill level required. You know, we're not widgets.
So I've been asked to sort of just wrap this up since we are almost over time now. So I would like to thank our panelists for taking the time to talk to us today, and to our audience, both here and online, for tuning in. Thanks again for sharing your morning with us, and I hope you all have a great week.